Hi guys, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to our second official AuthorConnect webinar. I'm Michelle, the Chief of Staff at BookPal, and today I'm here with our guest speaker, Allen Gannett, to discuss the topic of creativity. Creativity is actually one of BookPal's core values, and we're constantly trying to find ways to ignite creativity here in our office. So having just finished Allen's new book, The Creative Curve, I now have a bunch of great tips for how to keep the creative juices flowing. And we're excited to be able to share a few of those with you here today. So for those of you who don't know Allen, he's the founder and CEO of TrackMaven, a marketing insight platform whose clients range from Microsoft to Saks Fifth Avenue to Honda. He's been featured on the 30 Under 30 list for both Inc. and Forbes, and he's a frequent contributor on fastcompany.com. Most recently, he's added author to his list of accomplishments by releasing his first book, The Creative Curve, that came out this past June. So a little bit about what's to come. Allen will start with a 20-minute presentation on how to ignite creativity, and then we'll jump into a Q&A. So please submit your questions at any time throughout the presentation via the webinar question box, or you can tweet us at BookPal_US using hashtag BPWebinar. At the end of the webinar, we're giving away a copy of The Creative Curve to 2 lucky attendees. So stay tuned to the very end to find out if you're a winner. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out the recording to all the attendees next week. Without further ado, I'll let you take it away from here, Allen.
Thanks so much. Well, I'm super excited to be here with you guys. We're going to have a lot of fun. So this is a short talk that's based on my book. So the book came out about 4 weeks ago, and the book is called The Creative Curve, How to Develop the Right Idea at the Right Time. And the book is all about this question of, first, whether or not you can actually learn to be more creative. And I spend the first half of the book sort of talking about the science and the stories about why, in fact, we know that you can. And in the second half of the book, I interviewed about 25 living creative greats who have succeeded across music, movies, art, startups, all these different fields, billionaires, all these kind of eclectic people. And from those interviews, I found these 4 patterns, these 4 things they did to develop their own creativity, and lay out what those 4 things are. So the book is both a descriptive book, but also a prescriptive book. And so what I want to do today is talk a little bit about one of those 4 things. One of the 4 things you can actually do to enhance your creativity. So I'm not going to spoil the book, but I'm going to give you something actually actionable that you can start doing literally this afternoon. So like she said, my name's Allen. This is a giant picture of my face. And feel free to social media me, all those sorts of things. Feel free to send me emails. I'm pretty responsive, so if you have any questions that we don't get to, feel free to just shoot me a note. And today we're talking about one of those words, which is a buzzword, creativity. And creativity, we talk about it all the time. It's on magazine covers. There's this whole sort of creativity industrial complex around it. And you've seen the listicles, top 17 ways to be creative. And the problem is, there's actually quite a big gap in our understanding between what creativity actually is and the sort of popular notion of it. But one thing we can all agree on is that there are some people who are just seemingly so creative. They create hit after hit, bestseller after bestseller, best-selling product after best-selling product. They're the creative geniuses in our culture. And these are some examples that I think sort of represent the breadth that we talk about. We have Elon Musk, we have Beyonce, we also have in the top right Mozart, the sort of prototypical child prodigy. In the bottom right, we have Beethoven looking super creepy. A lot of times when I give this talk in front of an audience, I'll ask them to name some creative geniuses, and these names are usually recited, but unfortunately, they usually don't name my personal favorite, which is Taylor Swift, but that's because they have flaws and she doesn't, but that's okay. Anyway, so what's interesting about creativity is that the idea of creativity is so intertwined with the idea of creative genius. It's very, very hard in our culture to talk about the act of creating without talking about the people who seem to do it. And these stories of creative genius, well, they all follow a similar pattern. Paul McCartney is the #1 songwriter of #1 singles. He is a creative genius. And what's interesting to me about the story of Paul McCartney is, well, he wrote the song Yesterday, which you might not have known, but is actually the most recorded song in music history. But more interestingly, it follows this very clear archetype of what creative genius looks like. Because Paul McCartney, according to him, he literally dreamed the melody. He just woke up with it. He had this aha moment. He said in an interview, I woke up one morning with a tune in my head and thought, hey, I don't know this tune, or do I? And he was actually so worried about this. He just had this epiphany that he went around for weeks to his friends, just asking people, was like, have you heard this before? And they were like, no, Paul, we haven't. He's like, are you sure? And they're like, no. And fun little historical side note, he only dreamed up the melody. And one time when he was playing it for someone offered him scrambled eggs. And so he used these as placeholder lyrics. And this is true, you can Google it. And I'm gonna sing them for you because I think it makes it a little bit more vivid. But these were the placeholder lyrics for yesterday. Scrambled eggs, oh my baby, how I love your eggs. Diddle-diddle, I believe in scrambled eggs. Now, I know you're sitting there and you're going wild for my singing skills, and that's okay. America's Got Talent. But the important thing from this story is actually that it follows this model of creative genius that we talk about a lot in our culture, and that is this flash of genius idea. This idea that these certain people, these creative greats, are able to just have these sudden moments, they're almost electric, of inspiration that just strikes them from above. This is part of the Western notion of creativity, something I call the inspiration theory of creativity. And this theory of creativity has 4 key elements. First, it's individual centric, right? We talk about Elon Musk, we talk about Steve Jobs, we talk about Taylor Swift. It's about the solo genius. Second, for these people, it's easy. Like Paul McCartney rolls out of bed and has these ideas. Third, it's overwhelming. Like we literally use a lightning bolt analogy. We talk about getting into the flow, but for these people, these moments are truly moments of like an electric shock. And then fourth and finally, these people are all kind of weird. They're manic. They're, Steve Jobs was a jerk. People talk about Elon Musk being kind of odd. Like they're just a little bit different. These are the 4 key elements, but I actually also think there's a 5th element. It's also unattainable, right? It's a story of the haves and the have-nots. Either you were born one of these demigods who has this amazing talent, or you're one of us. You're a normie. You don't have it. Adobe did a study and they found that only 25% of us believe that we're living up to our creative potential. And I think this is a good place for my token sad puppy picture. Pretty depressing. I actually have a very adorable corgi, but this is not him. My corgi's never sad. But so this notion that we have of creativity in our culture, it's sad, right? And it's a story that, what we're born with is what we have. It's a story of a fixed asset. But the question that I interrogate in the book is, what if this isn't true? What if this notion that we've adopted in our culture, what if this isn't how creativity actually works? And so I look at this in a few different lenses in the book. And one of the lenses I look at is through the scientific lens. So we've been studying creativity in the social sciences for the last 40 years across psychology, anthropology, sociology. We've been studying a lot of neuroscience. There's actually a really rich amount of research in creativity. So in the book, not only do I look at, do some field research, but I also actually talk to a lot of the scientists who've been studying this stuff. And what you find when you actually look at the research around creativity is that it actually does not support the idea of the inspiration theory of creativity. In fact, quite the opposite. Let me give you one example. So there was one study that was done in Austria, Sound of Music Land. And in Sound of Music Land, these researchers had a question. If creativity and genius are intertwined, well, what would happen if you had someone do both an IQ test and a creativity test? Well, it should be correlated. The higher your IQ, the more creative you are. So that's what they did. They took a big group of people and they did that. And IQ is normalized around 100. There's a bell curve. There's an IQ of 100. Everyone, half the world is less smart than you. Half the world is more smart than you. If you're a BookPal client, you're above 100. And they told me to say that. But what's interesting is that when they did this research and they wanted to see if there was a correlation, well, it turns out there was a correlation, but only up to an IQ of 104. Once you get to an IQ of 104, there is no correlation between IQ and creative potential. So that's really interesting because that is not a dozen people a generation. That's not 100 people a generation. That's not even 1,000 people a generation. That is literally billions and billions of people with the same creative potential. And this is called the threshold theory. It's the idea, and it's been replicated in lots of studies, that above a relatively, low IQ threshold, everyone has the same creative potential. So the question that I really want to tackle in the book is, well, why is there this big gap between creative potential and creative achievement? And how do we close that gap? So there's a lot of things that I talk about, but I want to talk about one in particular that I think you can really dig into. And I'm going to use a story to tell this. And the story is going to take place in Phoenix, Arizona, maybe a place you live or maybe a place you may retire to. And in Phoenix, Arizona in 1985, there was something that, well, for me as a millennial, I had to research and I had to find out what it really was, because what there was a video rental store, which apparently was kind of like an offline Netflix. And in this video rental store thing, there was a boy named Ted. He was 18 years old. He was a community college student. He was the clerk at this video rental store. This is not a picture of Ted. Ted is not a grown man with a beard. But what was interesting about this clerk, this boy named Ted, was that, well, for some reason, around 5 or 6 o'clock when people got home from work, there'd be this big line of people waiting in line to talk to Ted. Because Ted, for some reason, well, Ted had taste. He could tell you what movies you would like. If you like Woody Allen, he'd recommend Albert Brooks. If you like this action movie, he said, how about that action movie? Ted was like this film sommelier at the age of 18. So how did he do this? Well, like a lot of things, it goes back to childhood. He grew up, he was the first of 5 children. His parents had him when he was a teenager. They lived in a small house outside of Phoenix, and the house was always chaotic. And so to get away, he would go to his grandmother's house. And I want to show you what you get when you Google image search grandmother's living room. I think it's very appropriate. Now, this story doesn't take place in 1965, but actually 1985, so just suspend disbelief for a second. But he would go to his grandmother's house, and his grandmother was one of these people who loved Hollywood. She loved entertainment. She literally would have all the Star magazines strewn across the coffee table. She would talk about actors and actresses with their first names, like they were former lovers and flames. She really just immersed herself in Hollywood, and Ted did too. And he found that this place was a safe place. It was an escape. It was a way that he could get away. And he fell in love with film and entertainment. And so one day, when Arizona Video Cassettes West opened near his house in a strip mall, he walked in and started talking to the owner. The owner was like, wow, this kid is weird. And he hired him on the spot. And, Ted, well, he was an interesting guy. He was in community college. He probably should have been studying to get into Arizona State. But video rental stores are empty during the day. And rather than study, he decided, well, I love movies. Why don't I watch every single video in the store? Every single video in the store. And, I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not being dramatic. There were less movies back then, but he literally decided he would watch every single video in the store. And the result from all this consumption was that he had this amazing taste, this amazing ability to understand what people would like and what they wouldn't like. He really had developed this. And this has served him really well, because starting in the year 2000, he became the chief content officer at Netflix. For the last 18 years, he's overseen all content licensing, all original programming, all content acquisition. This year, they're spending $7 billion with a B on content, and they are producing 700 original shows, not episodes, shows. And he's one of the people that I interviewed for the book, and what was so interesting, he was one of the early interviews I did, was from him, I saw this pattern that became very vivid in my interviews, where, we talk about consumers and creators as almost an opposition. Like there's that annoying social media meme you might have seen that's like, 90% of people consume, 9% engage, 1% create, #hustle. But the reality is that when I talk to these creative achievers, consumption was actually an incredibly important part of their process. Over and over again, I heard these stories about how these great creatives were also over consumers. And it wasn't like, they're going on social media, learning a little bit about a lot. No, they go very narrow and deep. They learn a lot about a little. They consume huge amounts of specialized knowledge. And you see this over and over again. I mean, J.K. Rowling was asked in an interview, how to become a great writer. She said the most important thing you can do is to read. In her childhood, she had parents who were always fighting. She would close her door and just read books and books and books. When she was in college, she had library fines. She had so many books out. So you find this pattern over and over again. Consumption is very intertwined with creative achievement. But why? Why does this work? So I'm going to spend a few minutes giving a quick overview in some neuroscience. And this time I'm going to use myself in a prop. I'm going to show you what I look like in 20 years. And this is me in 20 years. I think I aged pretty well. And for some reason in 2038, I'm reading a paper newspaper. I don't know why. And in this paper newspaper, I stumble across a crossword puzzle. Now, some of you may be crossword puzzlers, but crossword puzzles are actually a really useful tool in the neuroscience around creativity, because there's actually two different ways that you solve crossword puzzles. See, sometimes you're looking at a crossword puzzle and you solve it through logical processing. You're looking at each letter, you're solving it step by step, and you're slowly figuring out the puzzle. The first letter is G, the second letter is R, the last letter is N. Oh, it's green. I did it. And this type of processing happens in the left hemisphere of our brain. And the left hemisphere is where we store the more, literal definitions of things, the dominant meanings. It's, where your brain stores, definition 1 in the dictionary. If I asked you what color the sky is, well, your left hemisphere basically shout out, it's blue. It's also where you do logical processing, like math problems. And this type of processing is very conscious. You're aware that your brain is doing it. You know that this is happening. But then there's another way that you solve crossword puzzles. See, sometimes when you're looking at that crossword puzzle, you're like, oh, it's green. I got it. I'm brilliant. And so sometimes you have sudden insight. And what's really interesting about those sudden insights that are provoked by a crossword puzzle, or actually any type of word puzzle, is that they're actually, from a biological phenomenon, the same thing that a creative genius is having when they're having a flash of genius or a light bulb moment. And so scientists can actually use these and put people in MRI machines and have them, wear little visors that show them different word puzzles. They can actually use this to understand what's going on in the brain when it comes to aha moments, when it comes to inspiration. So Dr. Edward Bowden is one of the people I interviewed for the book, and he has spent his whole career studying insight and aha moments. And what was so interesting about what he said is, really at the end of the day, aha moments, they're a normal cognitive process, but they have a surprising result. They're a normal cognitive process. See, aha moments happen in the right hemisphere of our brain. This is where we store the more distant or metaphorical definitions of words or concepts. Think about, dictionary definition 2 or 3. This is where, you have metaphors or wordplay. And the processing that goes on in here is subconscious. Think about, when you hear a stand-up comedian tell a joke, you're not thinking, why is this funny? You just get the joke, unless it's Adam Sandler. And so another way you can think about this is comparing. Think about it like this. If I asked you to visualize a worm, well, your left hemisphere would think of the sort of main idea of a worm, something like this, without the creepy face. And your right hemisphere would think of other things like gummy worms, or those songs you can't stop thinking about, like earworms. And so what you find is that these aha moments, they're actually not special. They just happen to happen in the right hemisphere of our brain, and they happen to do the work subconsciously. And it's only once your right hemisphere comes up with a new idea that it actually sort of pops into consciousness. And one metaphor I really like is the idea that your left hemisphere is like your loud lab partner in college who, talks through every problem really loudly. And when they get the answer, they're like, yeah, go team, good job. And you're like, why does he call everything a team? And then your right hemisphere is your like dorky, quiet lab partner who's sort of mumbling to him or herself. And only once they get the answer do they go, hey, I got the answer. And if your left hemisphere is too loud, if the loud lab partner is too loud, you can't actually hear them. And so this is why you experience aha moments in the shower or when you're running or on the gym or in a commute. It's not that your commute is inspiring. It's just that your left hemisphere is quiet. You can actually hear what's going on in your right hemisphere. And so the question then is, well, how do you make these aha moments happen? Well, I have a quote in the book from Dr. Edward Bowden that I think is so important. It's in the book twice. Well, the thing that scientists find, well, you have to have prior knowledge. The quote he said was, you can't have insights about things you don't know anything about. You know, Paul McCartney grew up in a musical household. He had musical parents. He literally played in a cover band for years. So yeah, he dreams about melodies and you don't. J.K. Rowling had her head in a book. So yeah, she thinks of story ideas and you don't. But that's actually logical. And this is why in my interviews, what I found was that over and over again, you found that these great creative achievers were some of the biggest consumers. So I interviewed in my book, you know, everyone from billionaires like David Rubenstein to Kenya Barris, the creator of Blackish, to YouTubers like Casey Neistat or Brenda Chapman, the first woman to win the Academy Award for Best Animated Film. And over again, I found that consumption was one of the most critical parts of the creative process. And the last thing I want to leave you with is that this isn't just a childhood phenomenon. But the other thing I found that I was really shocked by, you know, I was talking to Ted, and he's a busy guy. He has a private plane, and I'm kind of a ditzy interviewer. And I asked him, I was like, well, how much TV do you watch these days? And he was like, like 3 to 4 hours a day. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, 3 to 4 hours. I was like, oh, really? See, the thing is that these great creative achievers, because they need to have the dots to connect the dots, because they need to have the ingredients for creativity, they actually keep consuming throughout their careers. I call this the 20% principle. It's this thing I found over and over again across all these industries, that creative achievers tend to spend about 3 to 4 hours a day, about 20% of their waking hours, consuming specialized content in their vertical. Because that's what gives them the ingredients for their new ideas, the ideas that have led them to fame and fortune. So I want to leave you guys with a few quick things before we go into Q&A. One is that science shows us that we actually all have the same creative potential. And we also know that aha moments and inspiration, well, they're not some magical divine thing. They're actually just simple biology. It's what happens in our right hemisphere. And if we want to have more of them, well, the thing we really have to do is we just need to consume more. And it's not about consuming, you're not becoming Renaissance people. It's about consuming highly specialized knowledge in your narrow vertical. It's about doing it on and on throughout your career. So we're going to go to Q&A. I'm happy to answer your questions. If we don't get to one, please feel free to send me an email. I also have a newsletter you can sign up for at allen.xyz, where I send out creativity research, but I turned into like a 500 word, sort of very simple to understand sort of summary, so you can get some actionable tips from the latest science. So let's go over to questions. I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to moderate.
Thank you, Alan. What a great presentation. My brain's still spinning a little bit from all of those ideas that you threw at us. All right, let's go ahead and get started with the questions.
Starting with Hannah, she asked, was there anything that you learned during the process of your research and or during the interviewing process that really surprised you?
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought was just sort of interesting throughout the whole experience was that the people, these really successful people who've had these long careers spanning industries or companies, they tended to be very nice. And, I found a lot of times like the middle management tended to be rude or, inaccessible or flippant. But a lot of these people have had these very long career arcs, did not fit this prototype of being sort of these jerks. They're actually very sweet and kind. And I think you sort of see generally in creative careers, there's sort of a long arc of justice of people who are jerks. Eventually people get sick of them, or, they get exposed for being a jerk, which obviously we're seeing a lot in culture right now. And so that's one thing that I was really sort of surprised by, was just how consistently nice and pleasant these people were, compared to my expectations.
Yeah, I think sometimes we kind of have this picture in our heads of what we think these really famous or successful people are going to be like, that turns out to be completely off. So that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. I have a question here from Kevin. He said, how did you choose the people to interview during your research when there's so many different creatives in so many different fields?
Yeah, great question. So basically, I had a research assistant who we built up this massive spreadsheet, and we basically focused on, we wanted to get different verticals. We wanted to get basically different geographic spread, different verticals, different genders and races. And we sort of made this massive, massive list and then started reaching out to people. And one thing, by the way, that's really interesting about writing a book on creativity is one of the findings I talk about in the book is that creative fields are actually some of the least diverse. 92% of venture capitalists are white, 88% are male. Startup founders, only 1% of venture capital goes to Black female founders. You find over and over again, Hollywood, for example, is a very white industry. And one of the things that's so interesting is that a huge part of creative success is actually around the creative community you build around yourself. And I have a whole chapter on some of the social dynamics around creativity. And a big part of creative achievement is getting someone else to lend you their reputation early in their career, whether this is in academia, it's a senior researcher. In Hollywood, it's an older producer. And startups, it's a board of director member, something like that. And so since that's a huge element of creative achievement, you actually find that a lot of creative industries are less diverse than some other industries like banking or insurance, for example. Banking has actually become much more diverse relative to Hollywood. And so that's starting to change a lot. But that was one finding that sort of surprised and saddened me, but started to sort of understand why that is. And it's really because there's this huge social component around creativity.
Yeah, I think we tend to your point, think of creativity within the constraints of very obviously creative professions and industries. But, like here at BookPal, like we really look at creativity when it comes to our processes and our operation style of how we go about achieving, success with our orders for our clients. And there's so many different ways in which you can be creative. So I love that you touch on that. They touched on that in your presentation in the book as well.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and one of the things that's important is that is something that I talk a lot about is that creativity at Google is great, but like everyone's creative at Google. Actually, in sort of the modern workforce, being creative at a company which people traditionally don't think of as creative, that's actually some of the most valuable. Like being another creative person at Google is actually not that exciting. No offense to Google's on the phone, but that's actually where if you're in insurance or financial services, some of these more traditional industries, that's actually one of the places where creativity can have the biggest impact, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, we have one more question from Tom. What do you do when you're having moments of lacking creative inspiration? Like, did you run into any writer's block, for example, when you were writing your book, The Creative Curve?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think there's this myth around, just sort of keep banging your head against the wall and keep writing. And what I found was that a lot of these creators actually just don't do that. They just sort of let it ride and they write when they write and they have a routine, but if it's not happening, it's not happening. And I think one practice I saw that seems to work really well for people is that people just, if they're running into a moment where they don't have ideas, is just go out and consume, right? Go to a museum, go, get more material in there, and you'll find that naturally you start having ideas again. And so that's something that I found for me, how I organized my writing days was basically, I'm my best at writing sort of first thing in the morning, sort of so 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Sundays is like my peak writing time. But sometimes I'd go till 1, sometimes I'd go till 9:30. And once I got there, I would go to other book-related tasks, whether that's research or organization or interview requests, or a lot of times just reading, thousands and thousands of pages of peer-reviewed research. So I think it's more important to sometimes be comfortable stopping and not trying to force it, because that's just a way to get fatigued.
Yeah, so that actually leads to the last question, which is actually my question, which is there such thing as overconsumption? As an avid reader and TV watcher myself, I'm just curious.
Yeah, great question. So absolutely, there totally is, just in terms of if it prevents you from going about your day. But the thing that I talk about in the book, one of the other sort of things around the creative curve is that it's not just about how much you consume, but also how you consume it. So in the book, I talk about how these really successful creative achievers, they're not just consuming for consumption's sake. They actually consume in a much more interactive way, where they sort of are either literally or essentially in their mind sort of outlining the meta structure of any creative work they're interfacing with. And they use that as a way to understand it. So you see like stand-up comedians, for example, or romance writers, I talked to both fields, they create a sort of taxonomy for the different parts of a joke or the different parts of a romance novel. And they use that as they're reading something new to understand what the creator is doing with those concepts. And that's how they consume. It's this much more sort of interactive way of doing it. And so, when you're consuming, it's about consuming in this tactile way, not just sort of falling into it and letting yourself be sort of taken away by the story or whatever the creative work is.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's a very good point, is that it's about what you're consuming and why. So that way it kind of keeps you strategically focused. Awesome. All right. Well, that about wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for everyone for attending. As a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar next week if you'd like to share it with anyone. I highly recommend you check out Allen's book, The Creative Curve. And if you want to learn all of the secrets behind how J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter, you're going to have to wait until the very end, read all the way through to the end. And if you can visit our website at bkp.al/creativecurve to purchase the book for your organization, or you can send me an email at michelle@book-pal.com to learn more. We hope you enjoyed our webinar, and thank you so much, Allen, for joining us today.
Thank you.